Welcome to Professor Ortlieb's Bluebook podcast, a series of podcasts designed to teach 1L students the basics of legal citation using the Bluebook. In this episode, we're going to look at citation in court documents, which is going to have us revisit Bluebook Rule 10.3.1. We will also be discussing Illinois Supreme Court Rule 6, which is the rule that governs Illinois citation in Illinois courts. The Bluebook rules we've learned so far have focused on what you would write if you had an internal memo or something not going to a court. But when we're citing to a court, we need to make sure that we follow the local rules. Therefore, in 10.3.1, Bluebook points us to this idea of parallel citation in court documents, but tells us that in documents submitted to state courts, all case citations must be to the sources required by local rules. In the absence of a local rule, you can follow Bluebook's general rule. In general, we can cite to the official reporter, followed by a parallel cite to either the regional reporter or, as some other authorities call it, the national reporter system. You would use this method if you weren't required to follow the local rules by a legal writing assignment, or if the local rules were silent as to how to cite to cases. So how do you find the official reporter? Well, the first place you should look are the local rules. If you have a hard time locating the local rules governing citation for your jurisdiction, take a look at Blue Pages Table 2 or BT2 or Table T1 in the back in your specific jurisdiction. You'll note that there's a whole list in BT2 of specific local rules governing citation, and each jurisdiction listed in T1 also contains some citation or some references to the local rules that might govern your citation. You would then look up those rules and follow them. But if we're just going on a Bluebook default and not following local rules because they're silent or you're not required to follow them based on your assignment, take a look at T1 for any given jurisdiction. You'll see that some jurisdictions use the regional as the official reporter and will not have a parallel cite. For an example of this, take a look at Oklahoma. You'll see at one point Oklahoma did have an official reporter called the Oklahoma Reports, but that hasn't published any cases since the mid-50s. Now you would just cite to the regional reporter. If there are two or more reporters listed that are currently publishing opinions, the non-regional or non-national reporter system is probably the official one. So if you were to take a look at Illinois, you'll notice that there is a reporter called the Illinois Reports for the Supreme Court and the Illinois Appellate Reports for the Appellate Court. Now you'll also notice that they both stopped publishing around about 2011. But before then, those were the official reporters that you would cite to in Illinois. You might also notice here in Illinois that there are 3 or more reporters listed. When that happens, it's usually the second reporter listed that's official. In Illinois, at one point, we had cases reported in the Northeastern, the Illinois Reports or Illinois Appellate Reports, and then Illinois Decisions. Both the Northeastern Reporter and the Illinois Decisions reporters were commercial reporters, not the official ones. And yes, at one point there was such a thing as a triple cite, and some folks, you might even work for one of these people one day, will want you to actually triple cite your cases, which means you'll provide a citation to the Northeastern, the Illinois Reports, and the Illinois Decisions if you were citing an Illinois Supreme Court case from before 2011. Okay, so let's unpack this rule a little bit more. Let's assume that we're citing to a case in our jurisdiction. So what does this mean? It means you're citing to, say, a North Carolina case in North Carolina. You would use your official reporter for that jurisdiction, followed by the regional reporter. In this example, from West Virginia, we have the Hatfields versus the McCoys. I listed the West Virginia reporter first, WVA, and then my regional Southeastern reporter second. Notice it's not what we did when we were citing for cases in a memo or outside of court. Notice also there's another difference with your parenthetical. Under Rule 10, if the jurisdiction and the name of the court are unambiguously conveyed by the reporter name, then you get to eliminate that information from your parenthetical. So in the correct citation, that first one listed, you'll see it's just 1978 inside the parentheses, not including the West Virginia that you see in what we would have put into a memo rather than a brief. There are short forms available for parallel cites. So this medium form, this is the type of form that we use when we've cited the case in full once, but we've cited to other authorities since that last time that we cited to this case. It's going to include the case name and the volume, reporter information, and pin page, just like we did for our memos. But now we have to include both reporters. So you'll see in this first example, I have at 52 to indicate my pin page for the West Virginia reporter, and at 459 to indicate my pin page for the Southeastern reporter. In the second example, you'll see a blank that I drew in after Southeast second at. I use a blank here where I don't know what the page is for the Southeast second, or maybe where it hasn't been published yet. A brand new case will be published at slightly different times depending on how many or how far in the volume a particular volume a case falls. So you may have a case that doesn't have a specific page that you could cite to yet for a reporter, and when that happens, we just draw in a line to indicate that blank page. Id forms can be used as well, and we'll remember id forms are appropriate where you've cited the case previously and your immediately preceding cite is to the same case. If that's the case, if nothing changes, if all the pages are the same, you're just drawing your reader's attention to pretty much the exact same place in both pages, in both cases, then the third example of id period is appropriate. The other two examples, the first one is where you're citing to the same case, that Hatfield case, but the pin page has changed in both reporters. The first reporter is id at page 52. The second would be repeat the volume, reporter name at the new page. The second example is what you would show where the page number didn't change for the West Virginia reporter, but it did change for the Southeastern reporter. You would indicate it as such. Now, what if the page number had changed for the West Virginia reporter, but not the Southeastern reporter? Well, you can't transfer the id later. You would still always need to articulate the volume, reporter name, at page number for the parallel part of your cite. So what happens when you want to cite to a different jurisdiction? So imagine I'm sitting in Illinois, but I want to cite a West Virginia case. Well, when citing a case from state A in a court in state B, you cite to the regional reporter. Now, why do we do this? Well, because we want to make our cites user-friendly. And which set of books is a court most likely to have for cases outside of its jurisdiction? Okay, yeah, I'll admit it. They probably have Lexis or Westlaw. But let's for a minute imagine we're back in the days of only using books. And some people still do rely heavily on books. And I'm sure that there are courthouses that only stock books and not necessarily have widespread Lexis or Westlaw access. Well, what books are they going to have? They're going to have the regional reporter system. They're not going to stock the official reporters of all the states. They'll just concentrate on the regional reporters. So that's the cite that we're going to provide. So here, our Hatfield v. McCoy is going to look a lot like what we cited when we were writing our inter-office memo. We're going to use the regional reporter, and because we don't have a reporter name in here to convey the jurisdiction or court name, we have to put West Virginia 1978 in our parenthetical. But as we started out at the beginning of the slideshow saying, we have to follow our local rules. So here in Illinois, our local citation rule is Illinois Supreme Court Rule 6. Illinois Supreme Court Rule 6 is easily found on the Illinois Court's website by just simply Googling Illinois Supreme Court Rule 6. If you read through it, you'll find that prior to July 1st, 2011, all of those cases have to be to the official reports. Remember I said earlier, that's going to be your Illinois reports for Supreme Court cases or the Illinois appellate reports for the appellate cases. But the citation to the Northeastern Reporter and or the Illinois decisions may be added. So in plain English, what does this mean? It means that Illinois doesn't require a parallel citation in court documents. You can do it if you'd like, or if your boss wants you to do it, but the courts themselves do not require it. After July 1st, 2011, you have to use what's called a public domain citation. A public domain citation is a content and provider neutral site that shows exactly where the document is, the year, and the court that decided it. You can find public domain sites in T1 for certain jurisdictions that have adopted them. But remember, the Bluebook is not comprehensive and up to date at all times, so you may have other jurisdictions that do have a public domain site now that aren't reflected in T1 in the Bluebook. So in Illinois, we are now a public domain citation state. So if you have a case from July 1st, 2011, or since then, we have to give the public domain site with pinpoint citation to paragraph numbers. You can add a cite to the Northeastern Reporter or the Illinois decisions, but it's not required. So again, parallel citations still not required in Illinois, but may be required by your boss or even your judge. Sometimes judges have specific preferences of how they want citation formed for their courtroom, and that needs to be followed as well. So what if I'm citing to another jurisdiction's case in Illinois? What do I do? Well, Rule 6 tells us. If that jurisdiction doesn't use a public domain site, you have to include the date of the decision, and then you can either use the official state report site or the National Reporter System site, or you can do both. Once again, parallel citation is not required, but may be required by your boss. If you do use the National Reporter System or the Regional Reporter as your site, then also remember that you must include the court rendering the decision in your date parenthetical. Looking at these two rules together, you might have figured out, if I just follow Bluebook site, I'll be fine. If the other jurisdiction has a public domain site, then you must use that public domain site with pinpoint citations to the paragraph numbers. Once again, a parallel citation to an additional case reporter may be given, but is not required. Rule 6 actually stretches beyond cases and beyond 10.3.1. Rule 6 stretches into talking about statutes. You might remember from earlier that if you're citing to the Illinois compiled statutes, according to the Bluebook, you have to provide the abbreviation IL Comp Stat or IL Comp Stat An, depending on which one you're using. But under Rule 6, we get to change that IL Comp Stat An to ILCS. And this is why when you read an Illinois case citing to the Illinois statutes, they never say IL Comp Stat An in the citation, they just use ILCS, because that's the convention that we use when in practice in courts in Illinois. Let's do an exercise. Let's generate a public domain site for this case, a full site that is, under Rule 6, calling your reader's attention to paragraph 4. You'll want to take a look at T1 in your Bluebook for more guidance, or Rule 6 for more guidance on how to format this public domain site. Pause the podcast while you craft your answer, and when you're done, start it up again for the answer. And here's your answer. Our case name is now going to be In Re CC. Yes, there were additional names to this case, but remember, we only keep the first listed party. So In Re CC is our case name, separated off by a comma, space, 2011 for the year, space, IL space 111795. That's the docket number. Put a comma in, a space, the paragraph symbol, a space, 4, and then a period. If I were using a parallel cite here, instead of the comma after the 4, I would then include my volume number, reporter name, and the first page, comma, the pinpoint page, and then a period. Because IL unambiguously conveys both that this is the Illinois Supreme Court and Illinois, I need not include that in any parenthetical. I also don't need to include 2011 in a parenthetical because that's conveyed by the public domain site. You have now completed this Bluebook lesson. You're ready to tackle your homework. If you have any questions, see your LARC professor or a TA.